Late medieval English towns regulated sewage dumping and roaming animals, while people washed and wealthier wearers used pattens to protect their shoes. How did civic rules and personal fixes shape urban life? In later medieval English towns, local authorities regulated the dumping of sewage into streets. The rule treated human waste as a civic matter because it entered space shared by townspeople. It shows an attempt to control public circulation, not proof that every resident obeyed or that streets became clean. Waste disposal had become something town government tried to manage. Those streets also had another regulated occupant: free roaming animals. Authorities tried to limit animals moving through shared urban space. Animal movement and sewage disposal were separate pressures, handled through local rules rather than one master plan called hygiene. Water was another thing town authorities tried to protect. Their regulations treated water sources as part of the same environmental problem as foul smells, bad food, and unsanitary trades. Medieval theories linked bad smells with disease, so officials had reason to act without any knowledge of microbes. The surviving evidence shows an attempt to manage water as a public concern, not a modern sewer system or a proven fall in disease. Public baths offered urban residents a communal route to full-body bathing. Popular in medieval towns and cities, they meant a bath did not depend entirely on a private tub or the resources to heat water at home. Communal access and private luxury were different things. One used a shared facility, the other depended on household resources. At home, a full hot bath was a resource-intensive luxury. It required water to be brought in, space for the bath, a way to heat the water, and time for preparation. Smaller washings did not demand the same combination of resources. That practical gap changes what bathing can mean in the sources. A person could wash at home without making a complete hot bath part of ordinary household life, while public bathing offered a different route. The evidence does not establish a universal schedule, but it does show why private bathing varied. The more water had to be heated and handled, the more demanding the arrangement became. A household's resources shaped the available options. Hand and face washing gave household cleanliness a smaller, more workable scale. In late medieval England, people washed their hands and faces at home as carefully as circumstances allowed. This did not require turning the whole process into a full hot bath. The task was smaller and could fit the resources a household actually had. Cleanliness did not have to arrive as one complete event. A person could wash hands and face separately rather than wait for the conditions required for bathing. The evidence supports the practice, not a single routine shared by everyone. That is the useful correction to the old stereotype. The absence of a regular hot bath does not prove that washing was absent. It shows that personal cleanliness could be assembled in smaller acts, around the water, heat, space, and time available. Soap made that small act part of a larger economy. In later medieval England, soap came in through import trade, while local production was also supported. The same household need could therefore be met through two different channels: material brought from elsewhere, or soap made closer to home. That distinction matters because washing depended on supply as well as intention. Soap had to exist, reach a town, and be available to a household. The evidence does not give prices or quantities, so it cannot show equal access. It does show that cleanliness was tied to merchants, production, and the movement of goods. When soap was used, a private wash could depend on a commercial network. In this case, personal grooming was connected to the economy that supplied soap. One practical answer to dirty streets could be worn over an ordinary shoe. A patten was an overshoe, strapped over footwear by wealthier wearers. Some pattens had raised platforms, lifting the ordinary shoe above the street surface and helping keep it clean. The mechanism is simple. Instead of making the street harmless, the wearer created a higher layer between the shoe and the dirt. That makes the patten a compact answer to the title's problem. Town rules tried to manage shared streets. Pattens helped an individual limit what the street could do to personal clothing. The evidence connects them with wealthier people, and some raised platforms. So this was a selective adaptation, not proof that the streets themselves had become clean. Chaucer shifts cleanliness from washing to the table. In the general prologue, the Prioress is described through small acts of control. She does not let morsels fall from her lips, keeps her fingers from dipping deeply into sauce, and wipes her upper lip so thoroughly that no grease shows in her cup. The details make refinement visible. Cleanliness here means managing food, fingers, lips, and residue in front of other people. It is a social skill as much as a bodily one. The passage does not describe a bath or a street rule. It shows how a person could display self-command through eating, preventing the body from leaving visible traces behind. This is a literary portrait, not a survey of diners, but its ideal is clear. Good manners kept appetite from becoming visible. Then Chaucer places face washing after work. In The Miller's Tale, Alisoun washes her face when her work is done. The sequence links grooming to a change in activity. Work ends, the face is washed, and the day moves into another kind of social contact. The action is small, but it has a clear purpose. It refreshes personal presentation without requiring the preparation of a full bath. That is how domestic washing could function, not as a grand ceremony, but as a response to what someone had been doing and what came next. A face wash could mark the boundary between labor and presentation. The scene presents that adjustment as a smaller act of washing, not a full bath. Cleanliness also had an invisible side. In The Miller's Tale, Absolon uses a breath freshener. The detail extends grooming beyond visible dirt. Personal presentation could involve the scent carried in the breath as well as the state of the face or clothing. The detail concerns breath in social contact, not the management of shared streets. Its role was narrower. It helped manage an impression made in social contact, where appearance was not the whole encounter. Chaucer's example therefore adds odor to the things grooming could address. Urban cleanliness had a private counterpart. People could try to control what their bodies brought into social contact, even while civic authorities dealt with the shared environment. Personal grooming did not stop at the face. In late medieval England, people endeavored to clean their teeth. Alongside washing hands and faces, tooth cleaning was one of the smaller acts that could address personal grooming without a full bath. It could not repair polluted water or protect shoes from a dirty street. But it broadens the picture. Efforts at cleanliness reached into the mouth as well as onto the face and hands. Taken together, these practices do not describe a clean streets revolution. Town rules tried to limit sewage, animals, and environmental hazards, while personal grooming addressed the body. The pattern offers one example of an unequal workaround. A wealthier wearer could strap it over an ordinary shoe, and its raised platform helped keep that shoe above the street. The street itself remained a problem. The evidence shows several ways people managed contact with it, with access shaped by place, resources, and status. Late medieval cleanliness was repeated local adaptation, not one England-wide system. If this evidence complicates the usual picture, subscribe for more evidence-led histories.